unbeatable.
What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Sodium285, and today, welcome to part 3 of my ultimate ranking of all 80 Marvel movies that I have seen, from my least favorite to my absolute favorite. I already did the bottom 40 in parts 1 and 2 of this ranking. Be sure to check them out before you watch this video. Now remember, my list isn't the right list, it's my personal list. We're all going to disagree, especially since some of these movies are what you consider some of the best Marvel movies of all time, but also some of these movies you think are some of the worst Marvel movies of all time. But without further ado, let's get started. So kicking off the top 40 is X-Men. Alongside the original Blade and the original Spider-Man, this has been credited as what kickstarted the modern era of comic book movies, and it's easy to see why. While previous comic book movies, especially Marvel films, had been pretty cartoonish in their portrayal of the characters, not really giving them much personality, this one gives them a lot of personality. Well, the important ones. Not to mention, this was the movie that gave us Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. He was an unknown at the time, but now he's a big name star thanks to this film. And my goodness, what great perfect casting. Not to mention Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen as Professor X and Magneto. And I guess the philosophical differences between those two. Right. I also actually enjoy Anna Paquin's Rogue. I will say what bumps this movie down for me is that the team dynamic is not really there, and they don't really give standout moments to all of them. In fact, the majority of the X-Men, Storm, Rogue, well actually not Rogue, Storm, Jean Grey, and especially Cyclops, feel pretty underutilized. Storm and Jean have some cool action scenes and cool lines and whatnot, but Cyclops in particular gets the short end of the stick. He's just the guy to keep the girl away from Wolverine, and that's a shame. But what it does well, it does really well, and I will admit it can maybe feel a little bit embarrassed to be a superhero film at times with very drab costumes. But other than that, it's still a very enjoyable film, even if it hasn't aged well in too many places, but I still enjoy the original X-Men. Number 39, Guardians of the Galaxy. Now this and the next movie on my list are two pretty controversial takes, because I know everyone goes absolutely bonkers for these ones, especially this one, because I think Guardians of the Galaxy, while definitely is a good film, I also think it's the most overrated movie in the MCU. Now hear me out and let me elaborate on that point. Make no mistake, I think 4 out of 5 of our main protagonists, Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket and Groot, are pretty good characters, and if you just had that foursome, I think you have a pretty good team. And it looked like that for quite a while into the film, like until midway when they're making their prison break. But I've always felt that Drax was unnecessary and was honestly my least favorite of the Guardians here, and even the sequel. Sometimes he was annoying and was really just there, for me at least, just to be the power man, even though Groot I think could have easily fit the bill. Which is a shame, because the other 4 are good characters, especially Gamora, and I really like her relationship with Star-Lord, and it's really good. And it also didn't help that Drax called Ronan to his location out of revenge. Now, it's more understanding than Rocket stealing batteries because he wanted to from the Sovereign, but it just felt like a lazy way just for Ronan to have the Power Stone in the 3rd act. But either way, Guardians of the Galaxy is still a good film. It's just not my favorite, and I think there are better films, not just in the MCU, but the entire Marvel movie genre. Coming in at number 38 is X-Men Days of Future Past. Another movie people go absolutely bonkers for, and I do think it is a very good film. Days of Future Past was a very emotional movie about hope and about not giving up. I really love the two Charles Xavier's meeting in that vision, and the performances are really top notch. Whether you're talking about Hugh Jackman, who is excellent as always as Wolverine, or James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, who honestly gives a very heartbreaking performance in this one. Then you have Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender as Magneto, as well as Patrick Stewart as the other Professor X. This was also a really great adaptation of the Days of Future Past storyline. It might not have been as big as it was in the comics or in X-Men the animated series, but it's still great. But I think what holds this movie back a little bit for me is that it did feel like maybe a bit of a return to form of those original X-Men films, where they get rid of the colourful costumes introduced in X-Men First Class, and it felt maybe a bit more like a Wolverine film guest starring the X-Men, and the team dynamic wasn't exactly there, only focusing on a very few bunch of the X-Men. And this might be personal reasons, because Kitty Pryde is one of my favorite X-Men characters. She felt maybe a little wasted. But either way, Days of Future Past is still a fun watch, it's still really good, and I still recommend you watch it. Number 37, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. I may not have been high on the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but I liked the Holiday Special a lot. There was a sense of warmth and heartfelt moments that felt earned to me. Now, not saying that the first two didn't have heartfelt moments that didn't feel somewhat earned, nor am I saying they were bad, they were good. But I preferred the Holiday Special. It felt emotional and endearing, not to mention Mantis often calling Drax out for sometimes his stupidity, and the moment where Mantis tells Star-Lord that she's his sister was really heartfelt. I think what holds this movie back for me is that there weren't many big action sequences like you would expect from a superhero movie, and it could feel a bit more like a Mantis movie guest starring the Guardians. But either way, I still have a lot of fun with the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, and I think it's a tad bit underrated, honestly. Next up is Iron Man 2. A lot of people like to say that The Incredible Hulk is the most undeservingly hated film in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, as you can see, I respectfully disagree. And even if you were just to take Phase 1's movies in the MCU, just that alone, The Incredible Hulk's got absolutely nothing on Iron Man 2, because I think Iron Man 2 is very overhated. I have a lot of fun watching this film. The chemistry, the banter, the acting, it's all top notch. Whether you're talking about how Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark and Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts were basically a married couple, and this was 9 years before Avengers Endgame came out. And even though I miss Terrence Howard in the first film, I really like Don Cheadle as Rhodey here. Plus, this gave us Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow. A lot of people like to say that the plot lines keep choking each other out, but I never felt that. I followed Iron Man 2 perfectly fine. It was Tony dealing with his inner demons and trying to cope with the fact that he might die, and trying to find another way, which goes with a motto that I like: when there is a will, there is a way. So I don't care what other people say, I really like Iron Man 2 and I defend it. Number 35, Captain America the Winter Soldier. This is another one that people go absolutely bonkers for. In fact, this is in a lot of people's top 3 favorite MCU movies. And it's kind of easy to see why. The action is out of this world. It has possibly some of the best physical and hand-to-hand combat in the entire superhero genre. And that is not an understatement. Not to mention, the chemistry and banter between Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson was off the charts. The acting, excellent. Not to mention the clash of ideologies between Chris Evans as Captain America and Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury. But there is one thing that holds this movie back, why I consider it a tad bit overrated. And that has to do with the fact that despite the subtitle being called The Winter Soldier, Bucky, aka the Winter Soldier, one, doesn't really have that much screen time, and two, he doesn't have too much of a presence to the point where it doesn't feel like the Winter Soldier is the main focus of this movie. I'd actually argue the Winter Soldier program was more of a focus of Captain America Civil War, the sequel. The central focus of this movie was the conspiracy that Hydra had taken over S.H.I.E.L.D. or infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. That was it. So I think if Captain America the Winter Soldier had more Winter Soldier in it, or its subtitle was Hail Hydra, then I might have actually had this in my top 10 favorite MCU films. But with all that said, I still think it's a really good film. It's close to being one that I love. It's just missing it because of that. Number 34, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Even though I have a pretty controversial take when it comes to the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, when it comes to Volume 3, however, I actually like this movie a lot. So you're probably thinking, we won! While Nebula is still somewhat annoying, the rest of the Guardians I think are pretty enjoyable here. Gamora is still a badass like she was in those first two Guardians films, and that is helped by Zoe Saldana's badass performance, especially with lines like, "Oh please." Star-Lord I really liked here, and I think he had a pretty good story about his family, as well as up about his grandfather, and when he quits being a Guardian, it kind of feels earned. Same with Mantis, she was great. I enjoyed her in the holiday special and I enjoy her here. Rocket's backstory was extremely tragic and made me do a pretty 180 on James Gunn's take on Rocket. And I really enjoyed it, and it gave such a satisfying and emotional ending to these characters. So despite my controversial take on those first two Guardians films, I have to say, I think James Gunn stuck the landing with this one. Number 33, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now this is where the rest of my ranking becomes tricky, because every movie from here on up, I can say with full confidence that I love. And probably hearing me say that about The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is making you go, "You're mad." So obviously this is going to be a brief defense of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, because while yes, there were multiple plot lines and multiple villains, as well as the villains being quote-unquote goofy, I think they're all brought together by one central theme: hope. Can Spider-Man give people hope? And more importantly, can he give himself hope? He thought he could give hope in Electro, he thought he could give hope in Harry, and Gwen was his hope, so when she died, he basically lost that hope. And then the people and Aunt May inspire him to have hope again, including the kid, who stands up to the Rhino. Sure, it was a bit too much, but it's the thought that counts. And plus, the action is amazing. I really love the acting and the emotion in this film. So I don't think the story is all over the place like a movie like, say, Batman v Superman. And that's not even getting into the chemistry that the cast absolutely have. Especially Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. Their chemistry, their banter is so amazing. And it makes a real good build up to Gwen's death. You really get the sense that Peter and Gwen truly care about each other and how they were each other's hope. That when she dies, it feels sad not just for Peter, but for you. Aunt May, her relationship with Peter is also great, and I actually bought into the Harry and Peter friendship. Electro, I actually didn't mind. I liked him. I thought he was a bit of a tragic character. And honestly, this movie has actually had the opposite of effect of Spider-Man 2 over time. While Spider-Man 2 is a movie that over time I've liked less, to the point where I think at best it's okay, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a movie that over time I've actually liked more, to the point where I can say, I love this movie. Now, do I think the first few minutes of the plane crash of Peter's parents could have been trimmed down? It's not terrible, it's just I think it lasts a bit too long. Yes. But honestly, that's really my only gripe with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 now. So, all of my gripes have started to diminish over time, to the point where I can say I love The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I will defend it. For me, it's the most overhated Spider-Man movie.
Now, looking back on it, I just remember the good stuff.
Number 32, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Throughout this entire ranking so far, you've probably been wondering to yourself, wait a minute, where are the Tim Story Fantastic Four movies? Sure, you can't think that they're better than every other movie that you've ranked below it. Well, honestly, I actually do. And it's kind of like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where over time I've actually liked Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer more. Yes, Galactus was wasted. I would have preferred if he wasn't a giant space cloud. But his name isn't even on the subtitle, so I'm not gonna hold it against the movie. There are so many great things. The cast's chemistry is just as excellent as it was in the first film. I enjoyed the Silver Surfer, and sure, there are a lot of subplots, like space anomalies, the wedding, the team's different responsibilities to their newfound fame. But honestly, I do think they come together, and they teach and it teaches them that the world still needs the Fantastic Four. So honestly, look, if you hate Fantastic Four Rise of Silver Surfer, more power to you, but as for me, I defend it, I love it. And that will bring us to X2 X-Men United. I may have been in the minority when I said that no, Spider-Man 2 is not better than Spider-Man 1, but I think I'm in the majority when I do agree with people that X2 is better than X-Men 1. This takes all of the faults of the first X-Men film, as well as improving on what it worked to make a superior sequel. And what I liked about it is that it involved the X-Mansion blowing up, and the X-Men being on the run, and the idea of killing every mutant on Earth, not to mention trying to team up with Magneto. And I really enjoyed the scene where they hide in Bobby's house. I really enjoyed Iceman and Rogue. I really like that relationship, even though I'm more of a Rogue Gambit guy. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, just as badass as he was in the first film. And I think Halle Berry and Famke Janssen were given more to do as Storm and Jean Grey respectively. Sure, Cyclops was undercooked, of course, and that's a knock I take against this film, but either way, X2 X-Men United will go down in history as one of those sequels that is superior to the first one. Bringing us into the top 30, Deadpool 2. I find this one to be a bit underappreciated because this doubled down on what really worked in the first Deadpool film and delivered, and I would say it swung for the fences, and I think it got a home run. I love Deadpool 2, every joke landed, the self-aware stuff. Sure, it's nothing original because we saw it in the first Deadpool film, but for me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think it worked here. It was hilarious, but it also had a lot of heart, which was a great thing about the first Deadpool film, and it had a lot of heart here, dealing with the tragedy, dealing with X-Force, dealing with the underground mutants and the tortured mutants. That was all stuff I really dug. And Cable and time travel and Domino, this was all hilarious stuff. So honestly, I will stand by that. I think Deadpool 2 is a bit underrated or underappreciated. So I love this movie. Coming in at number 29 is Avengers Age of Ultron. Another movie that I find very underappreciated. A lot of people like to say it tried to do too much and set up too much at once. And while I can definitely understand that, as you can see, I do think that this is the weakest of the 4 Avengers films, in the MCU at least. But I have to say, I still very much love this movie. I think the themes and individual scenes are just as great, if not some of them maybe even better than they were in the first Avengers film. I loved how it gave Hawkeye more depth and introducing his family into the MCU. And the conflicts, the interactions, Joss Whedon's writing, it's all amazing. Not to mention it gave us Scarlet Witch, played by the amazing Elizabeth Olsen, and she's amazing here. And the action sequences, the amount of heart, and I think Ultron's kind of an underrated villain. And getting into the psychology of each Avenger, it's all fantastic stuff. So even though Avengers Age of Ultron doesn't live up to how iconic the first Avengers film is, it's still great in its own way, if you ask me. Number 28, Black Widow. Another movie that I never understood the overwhelming hate that it got upon its release. Yeah, the villains may not be the greatest in the MCU, and I did think Taskmaster was a little wasted as just being a pawn for the main villain. It was kind of a Mandarin in Iron Man 3 all over again. But with that said, I find Black Widow to be such an endearing and heartwarming and kind of tear-jerking film. The first 10 minutes alone is already tearful. Seeing Natasha being separated from her family, and that's the thing, the family story is at the core of this film. Natasha rekindling her relationship with her sister Yelena and her parents was really emotional stuff. And I know a lot of people complain about the third act and how it gets very cartoonish for a movie that was quote-unquote grounded, but you know what? Captain America the Winter Soldier was the same thing, had a cartoonish third act in a rather more grounded film, and I didn't complain about it in The Winter Soldier, so why would I complain about it in Black Widow? So I will forever defend Black Widow. I think this movie is very overhated. Number 27, Deadpool. Now, like I had said, the top 33 is extremely difficult to rank because everything in the top 33 I can say with full confidence I love. So make no mistake, I love the first Deadpool. From the comedic timing to the self-awareness and fourth wall breaking to the fact that it was kind of a bit of the parody of the superhero genre, to Ryan Reynolds being perfectly cast as Deadpool, to the side characters, to the love story between Wade and Vanessa, to the 100% comic accurate costume of Deadpool himself. This is just such a fun film to watch. It's hilarious. Probably the reason why it's not as high as I imagine it will be on your list is because there are films that I might rewatch more than the first Deadpool. Make no mistake, I love this film. It's absolutely entertaining and it has a lot of great heart. So if you've never watched Deadpool and you're an appropriate age because it is R-rated, then you definitely should check it out. Number 26, Fantastic Four from 2005. Seeing this movie in my top 40 is probably making you think that I am insane. Well, maybe I am, but I really do enjoy the 2005 Fantastic Four film. I thought the cast had absolutely amazing chemistry, whether you're talking about Ioan Gruffudd, Michael Chiklis, Chris Evans, Jessica Alba. I thought they had excellent chemistry and I felt they fit the roles of these characters really well. And I really liked the simplistic origin story of about the Fantastic Four that it tells. And unlike the other Fantastic Four films, this one has a lot of vibrant personality. I thought this version of Doctor Doom, while it takes a lot of deviations from the source material, he's fine, Julian McMahon. I thought he did a good job. I thought he was a fine Doctor Doom. And I really like the conflict between the Fantastic Four, whether they should keep their powers or not, because how would this affect someone like Ben Grimm? And how would this affect someone like Johnny Storm? And honestly, out of all of the pre-MCU 2000s Marvel films, I actually think this is the one that has held up the best. Starting off the top 25, Iron Man 3. Another movie that I find either underrated or underappreciated. I know a lot of people took issue with the whole Mandarin twist in this film, and while I always found it funny, I can kind of understand why, but on the other hand, now that we have Shang-Chi with the real Mandarin, it kind of makes it better, and besides, I've always loved Iron Man 3. It's a delight, it's extremely enjoyable, the performances are top notch, Robert Downey Jr. is witty as ever, and the amount of emotion and the psychological trauma that Tony goes through in this film, as well as the fact that this very much shows that he is Iron Man, with or without the suit. I know a lot of people say there was a bait and switch because it looked like as if he's retiring as Iron Man, then he's back avenging in Avengers Age of Ultron. But I never interpreted it that way. Or the way I interpret it is that he cuts down on the numerous suits that he makes, because he still says at the end, I am Iron Man. And not to mention the trials and challenges Tony and Pepper have to go through, the comedic timing. Shane Black's writing is excellent. I love Iron Man 3, I find it very underappreciated. Number 24, The Wolverine. For my money, this is the most underrated superhero movie of all time, being overshadowed by both the poor reception of X-Men Origins Wolverine, even though I like that movie, but I'm in the minority there, as well as the critical success of Logan, which, as you're going to see, I have a very high opinion of. The Wolverine feels like the middle child. But honestly, I wish people give this one a bit more of a chance because there is so much greatness in this movie. Prior to Logan, I would argue that this was Hugh Jackman's best performance. I think he should have won an Oscar for his performance here, so you can imagine what I can say about his performance in Logan. And there is a great sense and amount of emotion. This might have made me care about the Logan-Jean Grey relationship in the first 3 X-Men films, just because the psychological effect it had on Logan in this movie. The action is visceral, brutal, and I really like his relationship with Mariko, and Yukio as a sidekick was really good here. And I know a lot of people make fun of the third act of The Wolverine, saying it gets a bit too cartoonish, but honestly, I still found it tense and brutal, so I don't mind the third act. I personally love The Wolverine, and seeing Logan finally gets a sense of happiness at the end put a smile on my face, so I will forever defend this one. Coming in at number 23 is Captain America: The First Avenger. This is another movie that I find extremely underrated. I never understood why people didn't take much notice of this film upon its first release. I know a lot of people complain that while the origin is well told, it gets montagey when it comes to World War II, but let's face it, so many superhero movie origin stories get very montagey. So I don't see that as a problem with Captain America: The First Avenger. Plus, I really love the origin story Steve Rogers goes to and how he rises up to become Captain America. I thought Red Skull was a great villain. You had that romance with Peggy Carter and the friendship with Bucky, as well as Howard Stark. And it's just such a humble and optimistic film. Not to mention Alan Silvestri's score of this film screams Captain America. It also has a very sad ending, and I honestly enjoy both parts of the film. Whether you talk about the origin and establishing Steve's morals and why he is the perfect person to become Captain America, or whether you're talking about the final battle where he sacrifices himself to save the war, and then he finds himself in present day. That's all very tragic stuff. So I am a huge defender of Captain America: The First Avenger. Number 22, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. The most difficult superhero movie to ever be created, because Chadwick Boseman passed away in a pandemic after the script was written but before they could start shooting. So obviously the script had to be rewritten, and I think they found a pretty good way to do it. While it does feel a little unfocused at the beginning, but once it cuts back to Shuri, it feels focused again and it's on her journey. And I think it's a beautiful and emotional journey, where I actually felt like an emotional wreck afterwards, with a beautiful ending, one about grief, revenge, and sure, that might be stuff that we've seen before, but Ryan Coogler does it in a way that feels honorable and good, and it's done well. And not to mention Namor, a great villain with motivation, and Letitia Wright I felt was robbed of an Oscar. Same with Angela Bassett, and it was a beautiful tribute to the legacy of Chadwick Boseman. And finally, in number 21 is Thor. In my opinion, this is the most underrated movie in the entire MCU. Sir Kenneth Branagh brought a sense of grandiose to Asgard and to this entire movie. It feels bombastic in all the right ways, capturing Thor perfectly and fitting well with Chris Hemsworth's sense of humor being all bombastic. But I also love how, while it's being big and bombastic, it's not afraid to get personal. You get this great story between fathers and sons, with Thor and Loki competing for the affection of Odin, as well as Thor learning to get more humble, and that's why he's sent to Earth. I personally really enjoyed the scenes on Earth just as much as I do the scenes on Asgard, because Thor is learned to be humbled. I enjoyed the side characters Jane, Darcy, and Eric, and Thor and Jane help each other become better people. I really like that love story actually. I've always been a fan of it, and it has a very tragic ending, this Shakespearean sense. So honestly, I'm a huge defender of the original Thor. So there you have it, true believers. That is part 3 of my ranking of all 80 Marvel movies that I have seen. Let me know what is your second favorite 20 in the comments below. And what do you think of my list? Do you like my list? Or do you hate my list? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe for more if you enjoyed the content on my channel. I talk Marvel, Ninja Turtles, Sonic the Hedgehog, Power Rangers, Percy Jackson, sometimes DC and Mario as well. So if any of that is up your alley, this is the place for you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back really soon with the final part of my ranking of all 80 Marvel movies. Remember, trust your own judgment, and I'll see you next time. Sodium285, out.
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.